Hello YouTube and welcome to an all new Elder Scrolls lore video. Today we're talking about the last living Ayleid, Laloriaran Dynar, the last king of the Ayleids and last Ayleid to live in the Elder Scrolls series period. His story is a very interesting one and is the end of the story of the Ayleids, so let's talk about him today. So, King Laloriaran Dynar, last king of the Ayleids or Wild Elves, and his name literally translates to ruler in dark times. He was given this name by his father, the king of the Ayleid kingdom of Nanalata. The name was fitting as Laloriaran was born in the early late Ayleid period, the period where the Ayleid kingdoms of Cyrodiil were locked in a deadly war with the Proto-Imperial Needs, the humans, who would later become the Imperials. And these Proto-Imperials were winning this war at a rapid pace. You see, for centuries the Ayleid elven kingdoms of Cyrodiil had enslaved the humans ever since their arrival to Cyrodiil from the north, something the humans were not particularly happy with. So one day the humans rebelled, in a large rebellion known as the Alessian Slave Rebellion, which was led by the slave queen Alessia. This rebellion was wildly successful, and with the help from the Nordic Empire of the North in Skyrim, some demigods and some Ayleid kingdoms who had sided with the humans, the Proto-Imperials managed to wrest control of Cyrodiil from the hands of the Ayleids and founded the First Cyrodiilic Empire, also called the Alessian Empire, under their new empress Alessia, who was formerly the slave queen who led the rebellion. Now, it's important to see these events in their full context, so if you didn't fully follow the criminally short recap of history which I just gave, I recommend checking out my introduction to the Elder Scrolls lore video, where you can see these events in its full context. That video is in the description, just like every other video that I referenced during this video. Anyway, the kingdom of Nanalata, where Laloriaran was born, was among those Ayleid kingdoms which sided with the Alessian rebellion and survived the long civil war. Why they sided with the rebellion is unknown, as the kingdoms which sided with the humans had various reasons, from theological differences with the other Ayleid kingdoms to simply seeing on time that it was a losing war for their kind and thus siding with the winning side. These kingdoms which sided with the Alessian rebellion actually flourished even after the might of the Ayleids was broken in Cyrodiil. Some of these kingdoms were even given new lands by the now Empress Alessia, and like I said in my video on the Elder Council, when Alessia formed an Elder Council to advise her, the vassal kings of the Ayleids were likely on that council as well. During this time, the kingdom of Nanalata was making a transition to a new kind of economy, which was not based on free slave labor from enslaved humans, which was likely one demand for the kingdom to be able to survive as a vassal kingdom in the empire. Now, from the memoirs of Laloriaran Dynar, we learn that this was a retching process, which likely was quite painful for the city-state, and at the same time the Empire forced them to adopt the Imperial Alessian pantheon of gods, so the 8 divines, throwing the kingdom into a theological transition as well. This was a period of rapid change for the kingdom, and most of it happened before Laloriaran became king and his father was still on the throne. But eventually Laloriaran ascended to the throne. And like his name, ruler in dark times, prophesied, his rule was not an easy one. As the start of his rule coincided with the rise of religious extremism in the Alessian Empire, you see, after the death of Alessia and her immediate successors, which were quite tolerant, a new religious sect in the Empire called the Alessian Order started to become ever more powerful and prevalent in the Empire. To be very short about it, the Alessian Order were convinced that the dragon god of time, Akatosh, was the only god worthy of worship, although they did tolerate the worship of the 8, but more importantly for our story, they absolutely despised elves, especially the Ayleids. And over time this religious order became almost a militia in the Empire and started to hold pogroms against the Ayleid kingdoms in the Empire. At this point the order had become so strong that even the Emperor could no longer stop them from murdering his own vassals, something which eventually manifested itself when the Alessian Order committed a coup in the Imperial city and took full power over the Alessian Empire. Laloriaran Dynar, now king of Nanalata, had managed to mostly stay out of the conflict and even saw Nanalata's might having increased due to the many refugees from purged Ayleid cities all having come to Nanalata to find refuge and eventually strengthen the numbers of that kingdom. Now, Laloriaran Dynar, having always had a good relationship with the ruling emperor and standing as a neutral vassal power in Cyrodiil, swore fealty to the new regime of the Alessian Order, hoping to once more keep his kingdom out of the shade. And for a time this worked. Nanalata survived and to an extent even flourished for 40 more years under the Alessian Order. However, around them, the Alessian Order now officially held state-induced pogroms against the Ayleid city-states which remained. King Laloriaran's diplomacy managed to keep Nanalata out of trouble, but one by one all the other Ayleid vassal states fell until eventually Nanalata stood alone, as the sole remaining Ayleid kingdom in Cyrodiil, and it's even suggested that at that point it was the very last kingdom of the Ayleids which remained, period. Although there are suggestions that there were more enclaves out of the Alessian Order's reach which had survived up until then, like in Black Marsh where we have some ruins from this period. But in Cyrodiil, Nanalata stood alone, and in the year 372 of the First Era, the fateful day finally came when a messenger arrived from the Emperor for King Laloriaran. You see, the messenger provided an ultimatum for the last Ayleid kingdom of Cyrodiil. Leave the Empire, take your people, and leave our borders or face annihilation like the other kingdoms. The Alessian Order wanted all Ayleids out of their borders, and King Laloriaran, knowing that he could not prevail when all legions of the Empire would be on Nanalata, decided to take his people on an exodus out of the Alessian Order's reach, and en masse, the last Ayleid people of Cyrodiil made ready to leave for High Rock, where they hoped to find a safe haven where the Alessian Order would not be able to drive them out. There were those who protested, who wished to stay behind and defend Nanalata, but as those who decided to move on would soon learn, those who stayed behind got slaughtered as the Alessian Order released their full might on them and fed their corpses to local goblins. King Laloriaran led his loyal people out of Cyrodiil towards High Rock. On the way it said that the king himself rode his loyal Senches, Sidar, and it said that every day he himself joined the hunters which separated from the Exodus group of refugees to find food to feed the lost population of Nanalata. Now, eventually they arrived in High Rock, where they found an ally in the High Elves of the Clan Dereni. I also made a video on them, so be sure to check it out if you want to know more about Clan Dereni. Now, in High Rock they drove out the orcs from this island on Lake Halcyon, and under King Lalorian they built a new Ayleid kingdom named Bisnensel, which means New Water Halls. Here the Ayleids found a new home, which they modeled after their lost home of Nanalata. The Bretons of the region tolerated them, and they underheld good relations with the Dereni elves who were their allies, but even this period of restoration would not last long, as within the city of Bisnensel the differences among the Ayleids living there ended up tearing its population apart. An Ayleid priest of the city by the name of Uluskan started a cult which worshipped Hermaeus Mora, the Daedric Prince of Knowledge. This cult started to gain traction among the population of the city and ended up becoming so powerful and influential that soon their leader, that priest Uluskan, demanded that King Laloriaran ceded parts of his power to him. The king decided not to surrender to this Daedric cult and refused their request, but then a few months later the priest and his followers undertook a coup and deposed the king. The king, his family and their most loyal followers, who would not bow to the Daedric cultists, were then forced to leave the city and then fled to the capital of the Dereni clan's holdings, the Isle of Balfiera. There, Clan Dereni granted amnesty to King Dynar, who would work with them and become one of their most powerful generals. For about 20 years, he was then one of Clan Dereni's most powerful generals, fighting with them and leading their troops in wars against Skyrim and eventually also against the Imperial troops of the Alessian Order, which ended up fighting their way towards High Rock, hoping to subjugate the province to the Alessian Empire. He fought many battles against the Alessians as they attempted to wrest High Rock from the Dereni elves, but ultimately, the Alessians failed when they were defeated at the Battle of Glanumbra Moors, where the Dereni, with King Dynar's help and allies from all over the north, managed to decisively defeat the Alessian Order's troops and drive them back to Cyrodiil, their power broken. As the Dereni troops chased the retreating Alessians, the king likely came across Bisnensel once again, only to find it in ruin after the Alessians burned it to the ground in their hatred for the elves during their advance towards High Rock. All that now remained of his people was he himself, his family and a few loyal followers. They travelled with the Dereni armies as they fought the Alessian horde back into Cyrodiil, and eventually they entered the Heartland. There he and the few elves that he had left came upon the ancient ruins of their home of Nanalata after splitting off from the main army. Their ancient home was completely in ruin, with the corpses of their family and friends who refused to leave the city still there, as their bones were being gnawed on by the goblins that the Alessians left in the ruins. They did not resettle in this place of death and instead started to wander across the face of Tamriel, where he and his followers would eventually find themselves in a holy city somewhere in Cyrodiil, which was dedicated to the worship of Meridia, the Daedric Prince of Light. Here he stayed for a while, and while he stayed in the city with his followers, the Daedric Prince Molag Bal, Meridia's Daedric rival, invaded the city with his minions. King Dynar took control of the defenses of the city and valiantly defended it. According to legend, he even defended a gate all by himself against the minions of Molag Bal for quite some time. But then Molag Bal opened a grand portal designed to suck the city into Cold Harbor, his realm of oblivion. Meridia then protected the city with a strong ward, but the city was still being sucked into Cold Harbor, along with King Dynar and the few remaining elves that were with him. The city, while in Cold Harbor, would serve as a protected environment with Meridia's ward still active, but over the years its population died out, and eventually King Dynar, now having converted to the worship of Meridia, was captured by the minions of Molag Bal and imprisoned in his realm, ready to be tortured for the next few thousand years. More than 2,000 years then passed, King Dynar remaining locked up in Cold Harbor. What few remnants of Ayleid civilization remained on Tamriel slowly died out, until it's likely that by the year 582 of the Second Era, he truly was the last living Ayleid. Although he wasn't on Tamriel, he was being locked up in Cold Harbor. For more than 2,000 years he'd been imprisoned in a cold, dark tower, regularly tortured. Now the only thing he could do in that tower is pray to Meridia for eventual release and write his memoirs when he could somehow get hold of a piece of parchment. His light had nearly faded when the Vestige, the main character of the Elder Scrolls Online, along with an invasion force of Mages Guild and Fighters Guild troops, entered Cold Harbor on a mission to stop Molag Bal's scheme of merging Cold Harbor with the Mortal Plane. The Vestige then freed the Ayleid king, who joined the fight against the Daedric Prince of Schemes, commanding the troops of the Fighters Guild as they had lost their leader in the invasion. The last Ayleid king then fights with the player until the very end. He helps close the planar vortex, which is sucking Tamriel into oblivion, and ends up giving his life for the cause, as in the final fight he is mortally wounded. His final moments are spent in Meridia's holy city, where in her cathedral he speaks his last words. "My time has finally come, it seems. I have lived far longer than any of my people. Finally I will be able to join them once more. My fate doesn't matter. I'm gladdened by the thought that Nirn is safe. I shall rest well knowing that my final day, the final day of the Ayleid people, was spent saving Nirn from the clutches of Molag Bal. I've seen the rise and fall of my people, yet I stand before you, the last of my kind. I am the last Ayleid. I stood alongside the younger races, I aided them, and I believed in what they fought for. But I'm proud to call you my friend." That ends the story of the last Ayleid, born in the twilight of their people, their last leader, a king in dark times. Now, his story is one filled with betrayal and suffering, but also courage and unending fighting spirit. His death speaks the final sentence in the story of his kind and closes the history books on them forever. In the end, mortals would fight over his crown during the time of the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion, where there's a quest to fetch the crown of the king of Nanalata almost 800 years after his demise in Cold Harbor. That is the last piece of his legacy that we know about, and truly ends the story of this video. That said, that's all I can say about the last Ayleid king, and I truly hope you enjoyed this video. The events of the Cold Harbor invasion that I told you about earlier are detailed completely in my video where I cover the main quest of the Elder Scrolls Online, which I released last weekend. Now be sure to check out that video if you want to know more about the events preceding that invasion and the whole context of it. And also try pronouncing the name Laloriaran Dynar a few times. I just can't do it anymore, and I'm very sorry for anyone I offended with my Ayleid pronunciation. But for now, all that rests me is to thank you for watching, and I hope you learned something new today about the Elder Scrolls lore, and if you did, maybe consider returning next weekend when I probably make another video. And now, all that rests me is to vocally thank my top Patreon supporters, Mr. Bernardo Binda, Gabriel Binda, Polaris Putin, Athena Heodis, King Chris, Bolt, Scrap of the Scrolls, Dozy, Fenrir, Sword of Bushido, Rakai, Zark, Mikhail, and Mr. Christmas. It's thanks to all these people and all the others on screen that this channel stays alive, and for that I'm very grateful. That said, I hope to see all of you in the next Elder Scrolls lore video. Bye bye.